Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Harry. I'll be joining you again this week as host, and always here is Rafe. He's our main guy, our editor-in-chief, our auditor-in-chief. I guess that's more of a financial term, right?
I take care of, let's say I do the careful work of management of the budget. And
that's an important thing.
It is.
That's going to be important in today's episode as well, right? We're going to talk about some budgetary things, some exploration type things. But, before we begin, we have to thank the listeners.
Yeah. And, I don't know if you guys get sick of hearing about this, but I certainly don't get sick of saying it. I have to say it is. I know some people are like, well, every week you think so. It was like, I do, because we are so grateful for having you guys out there, and we appreciate you spreading the love and spreading the buff and telling your friends about us so that you can, you get a free episode, but more than that, you get that warm feeling inside, kind of like spilling coffee down your shirt. But it is you get a good feeling for turning your friends onto the buff. And we really appreciate that. Because of you, we are a global top 10% podcast. As always, you can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. And we are here for you. So if there's something you need, something you want, something you just want to say, if you just need a shoulder to cry on, type it up in an email. Send us a note. So that's where we are, and we really appreciate that. And we also, I was thinking, Harry, whether you are sending an email to the buff, or whether you are out riding your bike up and down the bike trail, or whether you are on a ship sailing the Atlantic, sometimes you're going to get thirsty. And when you're thirsty, you need nutrition, and you need thirst quenchingness.
And you need a smoothie is what you really need.
A smoothie, and you need a machine to make it.
That's right. And you know what? The perfect machine for that is the BlendJet 2.
You got it.
Right? It's portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, or even a margarita on the beach. It's small enough to fit in a cup holder, powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. It's whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. It lasts for 15 plus blends, recharges quickly via USB-C. And best of all, it cleans itself. Just blend water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. And you know what? There's plenty of colors and patterns and everything else you can choose from. If you're Christopher Columbus sailing across the Atlantic, I'm sure there's you can get, regular black, but you can also get like shiplap, right? They've got all kinds of things out there.
I think they have shiplap. They might even have linoleum tile. I'm not, don't quote me on that, but they have so many designs,
so many
and colors.
Patterns to choose from. You can complement any style that you want. So what are you waiting for?
So if you're interested in the BlendJet 2, and I know you are, just go to the blendjet.com link in our description and grab yours today. Be sure to use the promo code BUFNAGLE to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other portable blender on the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of the BlendJet 2. They guarantee you will love it or your money back. Blend anytime, anywhere with the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to the blendjet.com link in our description and use the code BUFNAGLE to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever.
That's great. I just, I feel bad for Columbus because he didn't have any means, to plug in his BlendJet.
Yeah, I think he actually had a BlendJet, but they forgot to bring the charger.
The USB-C charger, right?
Yeah, they didn't have that. So they were stuck. There is some technology. Okay, we're going to talk about Columbus today, right? And I think that's probably evident if we always put the description in there.
Or like the title of the episode. But if you can't read and you're only listening.
Yeah, if it just shows up, if you have the buff set up so that on Tuesday morning when the episode drops, it automatically just starts playing in your room and it wakes you up, well, then you wouldn't know that we're going to talk about Columbus, but we are going to be talking about Columbus because October is coming up, and October is kind of Columbus month and pumpkin spice latte month, I guess, and some other month. But we're going to talk about Columbus. And Columbus in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? And Nina, Pinta, Santa Maria. We're going to talk about that and how he ended up doing what he did. And it's not just that you get in a boat and you start sailing. These things have kind of a pre-story and after story. And it turns out that the Columbus story at 1492 really starts probably about 1474 and prior. There was a lot of discussion on the continent in the mid 1400s with different, I guess I call the humanists, the people who were trying to bring back the learning into Europe and make sure everybody was on the same page with regard to what the nature of the world was. There were big conferences that took place, and there was a guy named Toscanelli who was at one of these conferences, and by 1474 he was an 80-year-old man, and he was living in Florence, and he had been to the Florence conference. And there was a guy that worked for the King of Portugal named Fernão Martins, and Martin talked to the king, and he said, we keep sending these ships down the coast of Africa to explore that, to try to get around Africa and into the Indian Ocean, and then over to India and the Far East to get spices. And it seems to me, because of these conferences that I've been at, and this guy that I talked to in Florence, this Toscanelli guy, that we should be able to sail west to get east. And the king says, tell me more.
Surely the earth is round.
Surely the earth is round. And that's they all knew that, Harry, right? And we have, I'd like to say we've beaten that horse to death numerous times, but there's a running joke or a statement that people love to, there's a flat earth society, right? And
they have members all around the globe.
Yes, yes, they do. Thank you very much. But other than that, no one really believed the earth was flat. I mean, it is conceptually where you live. You can approximate a sphere with a series of flat planes.
Yep.
But I tell you, it's a ball, and there's no other way to deal with that. And that has implications for global trade and for lots of other things. But the question was, can you really do that back then? It's important to remember that almost all the exploration up to that point was a question of what I'll call hugging the coast. You get in a ship and you sail down the coast until you get to a new place. And then you run ashore and you drop off trinkets, or you put up a big post, or you grab slaves, or you do something, right? You do something there, and then you come back and you tell people what you found. And there was a lot of...
It's easy to map the coastline too, right? You just follow the same route every single time.
Right. And you don't need to do the thing that mattered, at least to the Europeans, when they were going to do this, because I guess I'll call it like the left side, the west side of Europe and down Africa, it's kind of vertical, right? It kind of goes north-south. So the measurement that really mattered the most was latitude. And that was really easy to measure relative to the North Star. You can measure that at night. How high is the pole star above the horizon? And when it gets down to being on the horizon, you are at the equator. And when and if it's right over your head, then you're at the North Pole, right? So
it's probably a little chilly up there.
It is. Well, I think that would probably stop. If it's above your head and your boat is not moving,
you're probably in the wrong spot.
Yeah, you're in the wrong spot. But they wanted to do this global trade stuff, and they figured they can go around. So Martins talks to the king. The king says, send Toscanelli a letter and say, hey, can you explain to me again, because I'm talking to the king here and I want to get it right. Can you explain to me how we go east, how we go west to get east? How do we do that? So he does. Martin sends a letter to Toscanelli, and Toscanelli writes back. And it's this big long letter, and it's got a hand-drawn map inside it. And of course, all of these things, the originals are lost, but people would make copies of them, like by hand, with a pen made from a feather, or something.
Parchment and ink and things that take time. Yep.
Yeah, and things that are easily lost. But copies of these things exist. Okay, and of the Toscanelli letter, that became very popular all of a sudden in the mid 1470s. And so the king says, this seems like a thing we ought to examine. Okay, that was a thought that came in there. Maybe we should examine this. Okay, so that's in 1474, and the king is thinking about this. By 1487, there's a guy sailing from Portugal named Bartholomew Diaz, and I think you've heard of him. He was instructed by the king at the time to sail as far south as you can go along the coast of Africa and find the bottom of that thing and find out if it really does. That was the question. Does Africa, is the Indian Ocean its own separate thing, or is the Sea of England the same as the Sea of India? Are those connected?
Or does the other side connect?
Yeah, and it's, if you study the history of maps of the region and of the planet at the time, there were always little progressions. There are a lot of errors in these things because people were guessing or basing things on fairy tales or legends or whatever they were, because people hadn't been there to write. People that were drawing the maps hadn't been there and they didn't have direct evidence. But the maps started to show that Africa had a terminus at the bottom on the southern end. And we know that now. We can take a photo of the planet and you can see that there's a bottom on there. And that's the Cape of Good Hope. Mm-hmm. Probably misnamed, should be called the Cape of Certain Death, or as Diaz actually called it, the Cape of Storms. But Diaz was sailing south, and he had gone the farthest south of anybody for the Portuguese at that time. And on December 4th, 1487, there's this big storm hits him off the coast of Namibia. Now, you got to realize how far south these guys are and how big Africa is. That's the big lesson from this first piece, is Africa is just, I don't know how to say it. It's freaking huge, man. It is like this. It's like the biggest thing on the planet. The thing that's not the planet is it's Africa. And to understand exploration, you have to understand how Africa gets in the way of the Europeans wanting to go to the Far East to get spices.
Yeah, so just for reference for the listeners at home, for how big Africa is from north to south, right? Africa is at approximately, estimations here, right? 35 degrees north.
Yep.
Right, which is about where Tennessee and North Carolina are in the United States. 35 degrees north. The tip of Africa.
On the south.
Right, on the south side.
Yep.
South Africa, Cape of Good Hope, or the Cape of Storms, Cape of Certain Death, is 35 degrees south. All right? So if we push that all the way back into the Western Hemisphere, that's Uruguay, or almost the bottom of South America. All right? You want to go east, that puts you in Victoria for Australia, the southern edge of Australia. Africa is massive.
Yeah,
it's absolutely massive.
It covers 70 degrees from minus 35 to plus 35 on the latitude scale. And I think it's something like nearly 7,000 miles on the crow's wing, just straight on there. And these guys had to hug the coast to go around, and then you got to tuck underneath. You're not making any progress going that way. And then you kind of go, it goes down and down and down, swings west a little bit in Angola. I mean, so they're off the coast of Namibia in December of 1487. And there's this huge storm. And they, as any good captain would do, he says, you know what? We got to get away from shore. And the reason you do that is because there are shoals and
reefs and rocks and things.
And plants and birds and rocks and things. So and sand
on a ship with no name.
Yeah. And so they went out to sea. They went west out to sea and then kept going south. And they did that for 13 days while this storm helped push them along. Okay. No, and this is not hugging the coast. They were so far out they couldn't see the land. Now, you don't have to be that far out to not see the land. A couple miles and the curve of the earth will block the view of land. And I don't know if anybody has been, I'm sure Brock has done that in his Navy stuff with his helicopters and things. But my experience of that is when I was in college, we did it wasn't a field trip. It was a class. We took a class one summer on marine biology. And we went down to the Florida Keys. And at one point we went off of Key Largo. We went east to the reef there. And we were out and you couldn't see the mainland. We were only a couple miles out. It took us less than an hour in the boat. It was just a little boat.
Yeah, I'm sure you were paddling the whole time too, huh?
No. We had the motors and everything. This was high tech, man. And we get out there and we swam around and looked at things in the Atlantic there along the reef, but you couldn't see land. And to me, it was a little bit
Nerve-wracking, perhaps.
Nerve-wracking a little bit, because I had never been to a place where I couldn't see the shore. That I remember. And I can't imagine these guys being out in a storm for 13 straight days. I mean, it's a storm, so there's going to be clouds. So the sun may come out and may get bright. It may be a bright storm, and then at night it's a storm. And for 13 days they were out there west of Namibia, and they kept going kind of south. And after 13 days, they decided, you know what, the storm has kind of subsided. We're going to turn east now. We're going to head right back to the shore, and we'll follow the shore. We'll keep following the shore down. And they went east, and they went east and east and east and east, and they kept trying to find it. And they never found the coast, but on a hunch, Diaz decided to turn north, and he turned north, and within a little bit of time, he sees the shoreline, and the shoreline at this point is running east-west.
So he's found a tip.
Well, he's on a flat part, he's on an east-west coast. And as they sailed east, they noticed the shoreline started turning to the north. And they were like, we're probably, unless it kind of hooked and then went up and then went
unless
down.
Unless there's a weird
again.
peninsula thing kind of going on. Yep.
Unless it's like that, they have rounded the Cape, and they have made it to the other side. They're now in the Indian Ocean. Now, they sailed for a while going up that way. And of course, all the men have scurvy at this point. They've been out there like a year going down.
Yeah, they forgot their oranges at home.
Yeah, they don't, if they had oranges and a blend jet too.
There you go.
Bingo. All right,
but, Columbus forgot his USB-C charger too. So,
yeah, you would think they'd make a list or something. Like, isn't there like a Wikipedia page, things to bring on an exploration?
That's right.
Things for a boat, like fruit, USB charger,
clean underwear,
yeah. Well, that's another story. We can talk about that one later. That is what these guys went through on these ships is just, it's incredible. Okay, so they go northeast for a while. They didn't get up to Madagascar. That's actually quite a ways up there, up the east side of Africa. And finally, they're like, yeah, we've made it around. So they turn around, they come back. They try to make their way through the Cape of Storms, which is the Cape of Good Hope, and they're like, it was very nasty. Apparently, the winds are bad, right? So the winds come from this way and from this way, but the current's going the other way, and it's a bad deal. And they get back home in December of 1488, and they basically come to the conclusion, after all that sailing, that yes, we can get to the Indian Ocean, which means we can get to the Indies. But this is going to be a really hard thing to do for the purpose of commerce, right? And just to get spices, right? But, people want spices for their food because,
Well, yeah, if you tried the food in London.
Yeah. These were the Portuguese. I don't know what Portuguese food is like, but even there,
yeah.
Spices are wonderful, right? So this is going to be, if we're going to sail this route, it's going to be very long. It's going to be very expensive. It's going to be very dangerous. And it's certainly going to be less practical than we anticipated. That size of that African continent is a big hurdle. The big summary is Africa is huge.
That's right. And then in order to find another way around, you can't go south, right? You can't take a boat east through land. That'd be quite the portage, right?
You get a portage across Asia, right?
Yeah, right. So I guess the only other logical conclusion is, well, the Earth is round. Let's go west.
Yeah.
So in comes Christopher Columbus.
In comes Columbus. Now, Columbus was an Italian, and he was from Genoa. Is that how you say that? Genoa? Genoa?
Your guess is as good as mine.
All right, I'm going to say Genoa. That's what we're going to say here until somebody tells us we're wrong. He was born in 1451, and he first made it to Portugal in 1476. He was 25 years old. And he had been sailing for the Genoese, the people in Genoa, in the Mediterranean, and they had sailed out through the Strait of Gibraltar, and around kind of going north. And his Genoese ship, was attacked by French and Portuguese warships. Now, this was a funny thing for me to read because, like, who knew the French and the Portuguese got along?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Were they just lying in wait? I don't really know what happened. But anyway, his ship, and there was like a full day battle with these ships back and forth shooting at each other, and Columbus's ship was destroyed, and he went into the ocean, and he grabbed a piece of wood, and so he's holding on to a piece of wood in the ocean, and he's like, well, there's the land, I can see it. He kicked 6 miles from the shipwreck, or from the flotsam, I guess, to near Lagos, Portugal, which is a port on the south side of Portugal. So, and then eventually that's how he got to Portugal, and he worked his way up to up the west coast of Portugal to Lisbon, and then he decided, this is kind of a nice place. There's a lot of people here. There's some Italian expatriates here, and I'm going to now be a sailor of the Atlantic instead of a simple sailor of the Mediterranean.
It's the land of opportunity.
Yeah.
Especially in the late 1400s. Yeah.
Yeah. So there he is. He's 1476. He's 25 years old. He's an accomplished sailor, and he starts sailing with other people who are doing sailing things. He goes to Iceland and to Ireland in 1477. That's north, right? North of Portugal. Mm-hmm. He goes south to Madeira, which is an island 450 miles west of Morocco. So that's to the south. That's on that little bulge, that the top of the western bulge of Africa. There's a pair of islands out there called Madeira and something else. And he met his wife there on Madeira. Right? She was an island lady, I guess. And he sailed to Guinea in the early 1480s. Right? So he had been around, and he had done lots of things. And okay, so the book I'm getting a lot of this information from, Harry, is my favorite book. We've talked about this a number of times on the podcast, is The Fourth Part of the World by Toby Lester. And this is a little section on Columbus. He's got a couple chapters in the middle where most of this information comes from. And, I have to tell you this. I haven't told you this before. Is I have this paperback copy that I've had for 100 years, and it is dog-eared, and there's little notes everywhere in it. And I thought to myself, I should go. This is such a good book. I should get myself a hardcover copy of this with all the good illustrations.
And put it in a display case and photograph pages and have a whole room of it.
I should build a little stand for it. It's such right. And so I did. I went to the Amazon machine and I said, send me a copy of this book. And they said, here's a copy from this seller. It is new. And it was a very good price. It was like $17. And I was like, bring it on. And I was going to show you tonight on the show. It arrived on my front porch about 2 hours ago, and I sprang from my chair when I heard that, when my phone
You heard such a clatter.
I did hear a clatter. I sprang to see what was the matter, and I go out, open the box, I open it up. It's shrink wrapped in plastic. I was like, this is awesome. And I start going through it, and there are highlights all over the place in this new book. And I'm like, you sneakers. I didn't really call them that. I called them something worse. And they sold me a used book under the presentation.
Under the guise of new?
Under the guise that it was new. And I was like,
you sure you didn't hit the like new button?
No, I checked that. It said, I checked the description of what I bought, and it said new. And I got steamed, Harry, and I went to hit return, and I said, these charlatans sold me a... Because it was an independent seller, okay? And so I filled out the return thing, and I said, I'm going to return it at Kohl's, which is right over here across the street. And I hit the button, and I ran over there, returned the book, and I came back and recorded the podcast. So I had the book for less than an hour. But I'm going to get a new copy. I'm going to find a new copy.
But you've got dog-eared pages, and you're in the middle with Christopher Columbus.
Yes, I am. And here he is. Okay, so when Columbus had first arrived in Portugal, the search for new Atlantic islands was intensifying. For more than a century, sailors setting out from the Iberian Peninsula had been finding, raiding, settling, and exploiting an ever-growing number of islands: the Canaries, Madeira and Porto Santo, and the Cape Verde Islands, and the Azores. From the vantage point of 1,000 miles to the west of Europe, Portuguese sailors in the Azores had for decades been reporting sightings of land farther out to sea and had described how pieces of cane and driftwood, unlike anything found in Europe, regularly washed upon the shores. The stories tantalized some adventurous souls who, eager to discover new islands for themselves, began to venture out beyond the Azores to the west. Some requested official backing from the Portuguese court. A few documents recording those requests survive, and they spell out the names of the islands to be found, among them Antilla, the island of the Seven Cities, and St. Brendan's Isle. So people knew there was stuff out there, and they were like, let's go find some islands. And Columbus is like, well, this seems like a pretty good thing for me to do. I'm a sailor. I'm a young man. I got a wife. I got a business going on here. I'm going to go look for some islands. And they would go from the Azores. Now, the Azores are about 1,000 miles straight west of Portugal, and they're pretty far out there. It's interesting to me that people could actually find those without. How would you
without getting
that?
Lost, right? Going too far north or too far south, east or west.
In their currents, Now there's a thing called running a latitude, and that's like if you want to go, I don't want to say it's easy, okay, but it's easier if you want to go straight west along the 32nd.
We'll say the 40th.
The 40th,
right? Because that splits
parallel,
Portugal right through the middle.
Yeah, you want to go west along the 40th parallel. You just when you're getting ready to leave Portugal, you note the height of the pole star. And then every night you make sure that the pole star is at the same height. And if it starts getting a little higher, you know you're too far north. If it's too low, then you know you're too far south. And you just keep going west doing
and
that.
You eventually hit Philadelphia.
You should. Yes, you should. But the Azores are 1,000 miles out kind of in that direction. I think, do you hit the Azores on the way to Philly? Harry, when you're going to Philly, do you ever stop at the Azores? If you're going straight west from Portugal, you may hit, but these are small islands. These are little. These are 15, 20 miles across. If you miss that thing, it's like Shackleton trying to hit South
Georgia. Yeah.
Yeah. If you miss that, there's nothing for days. And I don't know what the strategy is. Is the idea that you sail a certain number of days, and if you don't hit them, then you just turn around and come back and run the latitude back? Is that what you do? Or do you, and how did they find him in the first place? Did they go like 1 day out and come back? Nothing. Okay. 2 days out, come back? Nothing. 3 days out. Is that how you explore into the unknown?
Well, sure. Like you think about it. If you're a 10-year-old kid exploring the woods behind your house, which I did plenty of times, you go out a little bit of ways and you go, okay, this is now familiar to me. I know where I am. I know how to get back. I know how to go from hither to thither. Right. And eventually it's got to be somewhat similar, right?
Well, but there's nothing maybe it is familiar, but I don't think there's anything. I think all of the ocean. Okay, this is an ignorant statement, and I know it's false, but the principle is true. All of the ocean without any land looks the same. Now, some parts are a little bit smoother, and some parts are rougher, and there's like the Sargasso Sea, which is like messy, but it's the ocean. And it's not like, well, I think I've been here. I've seen that wave before. I mean, it has got to be, I guess.
They are much better navigators than we are, right? Yeah. They knew how to chart the stars. They knew how to see all these different things. And I'm sure if you were to stare at the stars every single night in your backyard without any light pollution, you would probably be able to pick up on patterns.
Yeah, but still, that it depends on time of year and what your longitude is.
Sure, but over the course of 2 or 3 years, you can see that. Remember, a lot of these voyages happen, as you said. This started out in 1474, and at the conclusion of this podcast, or once coming further, we'll find out that Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492. It was nearly 20 years later, so it's a long excursion. It's not just this one-time thing overnight. Get directions from Google and go on your sailing merry way.
Yeah, and the book does say, for more than a century, sailors setting out from the Iberian Peninsula have been finding, raiding, settling, and exploiting every number of islands. So this had been going on for a long time. And I guess you go out there and you say, well, let's go this way. And, I guess you don't write about it unless you found something, right? So you do lots of them, lots of little explorers, and you keep going until you find something exciting. So anyway, Columbus decides that I think I should head west to find some exciting things. Now, meanwhile, the English are also poking around in the Atlantic, but they are on the north end. Okay, so they're mostly going to Iceland and to Greenland, and they were going after the fish, the cod that they find off of Nova Scotia and those areas out there. Now, it's a long way west from Greenland to hit something. Now, it's not 25 days worth of sailing, but when you're that far north and you're that far away from home, the idea of like, we should keep going further, I'm not sure that that's what they were thinking. So there was a lot of discussion that there was other stuff out there, but they were like, we got the fish we came for. Let's just, you know, in Apollo 13, the movie, when they're going around the backside of the moon and the ship is crippled and they're getting this great view of the moon, and you know, Kevin Bacon is like, wow, this is really beautiful. And the other was like, man, this is really awesome. Wish we could have landed. And Tom Hanks goes, guys, I just want to go home. And sure. I think at some point they're like, we got all this cod. Look, there's some land over there. You know, I just want to go home. So I think at some point, some of those guys were, I just want to go home. But there was something out there. And by the 1470s, everybody thought there was something important out there. And Columbus came to believe that too. So Columbus knows of this Toscanelli letter, and it kind of laid out the plan for him. So he goes to
the King of Portugal, right?
Right. He went to the king, and he said, hey, I need money. I'm going to go do this thing. I'm going to make me famous, but I'm going to get spices for you because I'll go get them.
And I'll raise the Portuguese flag along the way.
That's right. So I'm going to go out there and do that. And the king said, no. I'm going to turn you down because we're doing this thing. We got Diaz. He's going to go down the Africa, and he's going to come underneath, and it's going to be great. So, thanks, Chris. Go. You know, you
have fun exploring the Atlantic.
Yeah, explore the Atlantic on your own. But I can't fund you. I can't. And there's wars going on, and there's other things happening, and so that was his attempt with Portugal. Now part of the issue was when they said no is Columbus's estimates of how big the whole thing depends on how big the planet is, how far you have to go around. Because if it's going to take you, 15 weeks to sail that, we can't do that. We can't have fresh water for that long. It's like going to the Mars, Harry. You can't, right? There's limit. How are we going to do this? How are we going to get this? And they didn't have water making machines. They had to bring the water with them. They had to bring food with them, and they knew scurvy was an issue. So how do you do all this stuff? And Columbus's estimates were off, even by the standard measure of the day. The standard measure of the day put a latitude degree at something like 66 2/3 miles. Now, the correct answer now we know is about 69 miles, but Columbus was using an assumption of 56 2/3 miles. So he was
off by quite a bit. Like 20%.
20%. Yeah. And so he got rejected in 1485. And then he says, you know what? I'm going to go to Spain. So he wanders over to Spain. It's right next door.
It's just a quick jaunt.
Yeah, I'll just go. Well, you won't. Fine. I'll ask out the girl next door, right? So he goes to meet with Isabel and Ferdinand on January 20th of 1486. And his proposal gets referred to advisors, and they give him the stiff arm. All right. So for the next 6 years, he spends time reading and studying and looking for rationale to support his claim. He's hanging out at a monastery in Spain.
Probably not the pub.
He was not at the pub, and he was not on his phone looking up Google. He was in the library putting together all this stuff. And he's looking for rationale for his plan. And my friend Toby Lester says, nobody knows exactly what Columbus read. Even the contents of such a library are a mystery. There is no catalog that survives for the collection, which was dispersed long ago. Nevertheless, it is possible to make an educated guess about what Columbus would have found in a well-stocked 15th century Spanish Franciscan library. The Bible, of course, and scores of other works that in one way or another discuss the East, the commentaries of the Church Fathers, the history and literatures of ancient Rome, the great classical and medieval encyclopedias, The Historical Mirror of Vincent of Beauvais, which contains condensed accounts of early Franciscan and Dominican missions to Asia. The Book of Knowledge of All Things, itself possibly the work of Spanish Franciscans. The widely popular Voyage of St. Brendan, the Abbot, and Mandeville's Travels. The works of Ptolemy and Strabo, both of which appeared in print repeatedly during the 1470s and 1480s, and perhaps a copy of Marco Polo's book. So there's a lot of things that he was reading, right? And he would find pieces to support his assumptions, and he would lay them out. So when it came time for him to argue with the committee that was charged to evaluate him in Spain, he had evidence, okay, and he got denied again. they didn't believe him, so he leaves Spain dejected in January of 1492. And
but isn't this the year where he's supposed to explore?
Yes, it is, because the story turns like a Hollywood movie. Okay. At this point, that's what Lester says. And at this point, the story takes on a Hollywood-like quality. Dejected but unbowed, Columbus is said to have left the Spanish court, mounted a mule, and set off toward Cordoba, already mulling over plans to take his proposal to the King of France, because he's right next door.
Sure, yep.
But some 10 miles from Granada, a court messenger who had been sent out after him at a gallop overtook him. He had startling news. Louis de Santangel, the court treasurer and an old friend of Columbus, had convinced Isabella and Ferdinand to back Columbus's enterprise of the Indies after all. 3 months later, Columbus had it in writing, and by August, he was on his way to the Canaries, and by September, he was on his way to the New World. And that is where we're going to leave it here for the end of step one. I'll give you a little spoiler. He finds some land west in the Atlantic.
Yeah, so I guess it pays off to know people in the royal court.
And there's some tenacity in there too. I mean, he was really dogged when that's how you get to be an explorer. If you just take the first no, then
I guess you're not going anywhere.
Yeah, well, he went to Portugal, then he went to Spain, and then he was going to go to France. He was going to keep going. Never know, he might have ended up.
Somebody's got to say yes eventually, right?
Somebody will eventually say yes, and that's probably the thing. Be dogged in your approach to that. So we are going to pick up when we resume this. We're going to pick up with his preparations and his sailing to the west, and he's going to land on some islands and meet some people that he didn't quite expect to meet.
There you go. And we encourage everybody to seek the good, be the good, and spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.